It's in the waiting room.
I think that.
family business. So I plan to give him just a few more minutes, 2 more minutes. I see Tim Prentice has changed his name officially. Well, look, I think I'm going to proceed. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 7:06 p.m. Members in attendance are Phil West, James Laporta, Keith Bodwell. Those are our regular members. We're going to seat Christine Gray for Jill Cutler. I'm going to temporarily seat Bruce Bennett for Steve Sicardi. And when Steve comes in, you will still be able to participate in the discussion, Bruce, but you won't be able to vote or make a motion. Does everybody understand? All right. There is not going to be a public comment period during this meeting. The first item on the agenda is commission discussion and action, renewal of the Northwest Hills COG Technical Planning Services Agreement for contractual consulting services. Before I open the discussion on the contract between the Board of Selectmen and the Northwest Hills COG, I want to apologize to Janelle on behalf of the commission for not being better informed about her qualifications in order to defend her appropriately against the public slander she has endured during hearing testimony on social media and in various emails that have come to the attention of the commissioners. When we were informed by our previous chair that Janelle was a well-educated and experienced land use planner, we took that for granted and did not inquire further. Well, now I have inquired further and I want to share what I've learned. Janelle received a BA in economics from UConn in 2007. In 2012, she received a master's degree in planning from the University of Southern California. During the years of her graduate studies, she worked as a planning associate for the city of Los Angeles, and then as a program manager for the Los Angeles Neighborhood Initiative, otherwise known as LANI, which is a well-known not-for-profit that specializes in revitalization projects. After 4 years there, she returned to Connecticut and became the zoning enforcement officer and assistant town planner for the town of Mansfield, which has a population of 26,543. She was there for just under 4 years before being snapped up by Northwest Hills COG as a regional planner. And by the way, she also has a certification as an inland wetlands officer in Connecticut, as well as her zoning enforcement officer certification. So Janelle, I'm apologizing again, this time on behalf of the town. The questions that were raised about your abilities were no doubt a function of ignorance of the facts, plus, I believe, a pervasive refusal to believe that women can rise to the top in jobs ordinarily dominated by men. Now, if any, thank you, Bruce. Now, if any commissioners have questions about any of the details of the work Janelle has done, she's quite happy to answer questions from commissioners. Bruce, you have a question.
Questions. A couple of questions. Janelle, you know, I came into this whole thing much later than other commissioners who have been working with you for a while. So I was really unaware of exactly what your position was, you know, in relationship to the zoning commission. I almost assumed that you were almost kind of there to be able to write down what we were throwing at you. And so I have some questions to you. What is your understanding of your position and relationship to the commission? In other words, what do you see your job is, and how do you feel you should be relating to the commission and we to you?
Janelle, are you there?
Yeah, my connection isn't great, so I heard a little bit of that.
Well, maybe I can partially answer that. There are some task orders in the contract that describe what Janelle is supposed to do for us. And if you could hold your questioning until our June meeting, Bruce, we are going to have a renewed discussion amongst ourselves so the commissioners can decide how we're going to proceed and in what way we're going to do that, using Janelle as our consultant. So I don't think we need to go into her old contract this evening, if that's okay with you.
Oh yeah, no problem. I just wanted to know, kind of what her opinion was, because I didn't know exactly what her job was in relationship to the commission. As I said, coming in late, and I just thought that
Well,
if she was able to explain that, that would be, helpful for me to understand.
Right. Janelle, can you hear us now? Probably not.
I think you disappeared again.
Yeah.
Do you want me?
We'll talk about this at our next meeting. Janelle, I believe, would like to have a role that is less interrupted by commissioners who think they have better ways of doing things.
Mhm.
Just in a nutshell.
Mhm.
I think, and so we'll just leave it at that.
So Anna, maybe can I clarify just for a second, because it might help. The town has for a number of years had, in addition to having Planning and Zoning Commission, has services of a professional planner, separate from the land use office, but is someone that has planning credentials, much as Janelle has, professional planner. And they've used the services of several people over the last while to revise regulations, incorporating the latest planning ideas and organizational skills. And I think that's going back a while before the current town plan. The town, when Tom McGowan retired, the town engaged the services of the COG. Originally, it was with Jocelyn Eyre in task order number 1, and we had task order number 2, which is expiring in July. And so now we're looking at task order number 3. So it's basically professional planning services. I think, is that your understanding, Anna?
Yeah. But in terms, so I think we'll just leave that there if that's all right. And last chance for any other questions. If not, if you don't have a question, I would like to hear a motion to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that they renew the contract with the Northwest Hills COG for an additional 2 years. Somebody make that motion, or I will make the motion.
I'll make the motion. I'll make the motion to renew the contract with Northwest COG Planning Services Agreement for the next 2 years, for another 2 years.
I think I saw Christine raise her hand to second before James got there. Is that correct, Christine? Okay, all in favor. We will listen for Keith's aye or nay, and then we'll raise our
Aye.
hand. Hands
Aye.
up. Okay, Bruce is voting for Steve, so that passes unanimously. Thank you very much to Janelle and to Gordon. We're now,
Janelle is trying to get back on, but
I sure hope she succeeds, because I had wanted her to clarify a few things. The next item on the agenda is the approval of amended minutes. These were 5 pages long, mostly single spaced. I read every word. So those of you who didn't have a chance will have to take my word for it that there were no errors or omissions. And I would welcome a motion to approve.
So moved.
James? Who's
Second.
going to second?
Keith
I
seconded.
heard Keith. So all in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Who was the first?
James was first,
James.
Keith was second.
James and
Sorry.
Keith. All right, so the minutes are passed. Could someone inform me if Janelle is here?
I was gonna say, if Janelle can't connect from her current location, she could scoot over here to the town hall.
I'll text her.
Thanks.
All right, well, our next item is the pending application, the amendment to the home business regulation. What I wanted to ask Janelle, and I'm going to ask our other land use specialist, Karen, instead, when she's done texting. Can you listen and text at the
Yes.
same time, Karen? My question is, I wanted some clarification on the degree to which the commission and the zoning enforcement officer can have more say in the zoning permit for a minor home business if we have questions or concerns. There's been a lot of arguments back and forth among the public and a lot of opinions that have been rendered. And I would like to hear from you, Karen.
I have to quickly gather my thoughts, but in terms of a standard zoning permit, I think a lot of people don't realize exactly what is on the back of a zoning permit, which is wetlands, inner corridor, need for erosion sedimentation controls, Torrington area health, et cetera, et cetera. So if a zoning permit comes in for small business, there is all sorts of other pieces that have to be addressed, and I have the right to look at all of the factors that are involved in terms of approval. As you know, I have to put it on the other side of my desk if there's, and speak to the inland wetlands enforcement officer and have a conversation with myself, and I have to look at all the other jobs that I fill. So I have a fair amount.
When would you choose to consult with the commission, Karen?
When I feel that you need to be part of my decision and enforce my findings.
And if the commission as a whole decides that we want to hold a public hearing instead of issuing a zoning permit, are we able to do that?
Yes, I would agree. I would agree to your, I would bring something to you for your opinion, and I would stand by your decision.
Well, Janelle, if she were here, would inform us that there was a case in 2006, Clifford versus Planning and Zoning Commission, which stated that any commission and ZEO may choose to hold a hearing, quote, as a matter of grace and not duty, unquote. So it has to do with our perception that any application may not quite fit the standards and may need to be picked up to a higher level of perusal. So having discussed that in hopefully paraphrasing Janelle a bit.
Anna,
Yes,
that's in relation to a whole, what is our first one? Home office? Or,
Minor home business.
the minor home business.
no, it would be, no, I was gonna start at home office. That would be home office needing to be elevated to a minor, well, I guess home office doesn't need a permit. Minor
No,
home
it's
business
just-
being
It's
needed.
just the minor home business that's.
Yeah,
subject
minor to major.
Correct.
Okay,
There was a lot of public concern about that element.
Yep.
And it appears that the public has not accepted the reassurances that I tried to give.
yep,
So if Janelle were here, she would also cite some other regulations that have to do with how zoning regulations are enforced. I'm going to move on now. I want Karen?
I will quickly add one thing. There's some commission members who have not been on this commission for all the 14 years that I have been. James, you're probably one of the few, and I think it is fair to say that I have brought my issues to the commission when I've had them.
Yes, you do. You do indeed.
That you
When
do
when there's any doubt. Sorry, James.
Occasionally when there's no doubt.
Right. I'm going to proceed now by asking each commissioner for the thoughts or issues that they may have with our home business amendment. I'm going to start with James, since you have seniority. We'd like to hear what you think.
Thanks. This was kind of a bumpy ride. It is interesting that I think if you you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. That if you want to get the public's opinion, you can throw out something that might be deemed controversial, and then everybody comes out to express their concerns. And this one, I think, did fit that bill, especially, this is a second go around with it. I think in general, the plan is good and sound, and I like the idea of having the three home office, minor home business, major home business regulations, and I still feel strongly that we should allow the minor home businesses to be in without requiring a special permit process. I'm concerned because we had so many outspoken citizens, enough to actually get a petition going. I think a lot of that was based on misinformation, miscommunication, but there were still a lot of signatures on that page. So I think personally, there's also the points that were brought forth by the other outside attorney that reviewed them, and those concerns I think still need to be addressed just from a housekeeping standpoint, not necessarily the meat of the proposed amendment, but actually some of the technicalities of what paragraph makes sure we're covered in A, B, and C locations, et cetera. There was also a lot of discussion about the noise. And I think we were under the impression that the Torrington Area Health had that requirement, and then finding out that they actually don't oversee that to the same extent that they used to. I would be interested in actually putting a decibel level. Decibel meters are easy to come by these days. I actually own one. So some minor tweaks I think are warranted. Also, there was a discussion about if somebody's gonna propose a brand new building, that maybe that would automatically kick it to a special permit process. I can see where that could be a point that we would want to clarify. Let's see, I made a couple notes, see if there's anything else. The formatting, I also think, thanks Janelle for all the work that you did with the formatting, and I do like it, but I do see that as it reads now, because that's our only part of the regs that's different. I think it's probably better off if we keep it the same format as the rest of the regs, and then when we reformat the whole document, because otherwise, if everything takes as long as this thing did, it might be a long time before we actually have a coherent document that reads the same and continuously throughout. So yeah, so I'm despite my anyways, I think that we should probably, it's in our best interest to actually do it one more time with some minor tweaks, but I do still feel strongly that that it's very much needed for our town to have the revised business regs. I do like the idea that we do have some small minor businesses interspersed in the community. That's the Cornwall I grew up in. When I grew up here, we had, my father was a dentist working out of a home office on Dibble Hill Road. That seemed to work very well for the public services. We had the children's cottage and things like that. And some of those are maybe not minor and some of them are more major, but I think the regulation should still encourage those types of businesses in our community. So I would think that maybe we should withdraw the application as it currently reads, do one more minor tweaking session on it, bring it before the public and make sure that this go around, people really understand a little better of what we're trying to do and why. And then I think that there shouldn't be as much backlash for a regulation that I think everybody should be behind.
If I could, I appreciate all your comments, James. I want to clarify about the noise. The reason the Torrington Area Health District got rid of their ordinance was that there were endless difficulties in enforcement related to the multiple potential situations in terms of how much noise, what time of day, how long does it last, how frequent is it once a year, is it once a day, is it every hour? And what the town has actually experienced during my time on the commission is that there has been a noise complaint, and the Torrington Area Health District was notified. They sent a representative out, and Karen and the representative mediated between the complainant and the person making the noise, and they found a resolution satisfactory to both neighbors. It strikes me that that is a very adequate and beneficial way of handling problems between neighbors in a town as small as Cornwall. Now I'm just explaining what mechanism we've already had in place. Karen, do you have anything more to say about that?
No, you clarified it exactly as I would have. Yes.
Is Janelle able to speak? Do you hear us?
Yes, I apologize. Perfect timing for an internet problem.
Yeah. Would you respond to what James had to say in particular about the old regulations that may be in conflict with this one raised by Attorney Sherwood?
Yeah, I think the big piece of that is the issue about, and I will have to pull the exact section, but it's where the regulations state in its current form that there is only one use allowed per lot. I think that is the biggest conflict. I do believe there are a lot of conflicts throughout the regulations in their current form. There's some situations where things don't quite match up and they're a little bit incongruous, but we'll work on those eventually. But I think that's the most immediate concern when it comes to home businesses and existing conflicts within the regulations.
Right.
And
I
just
had,
for the record, it was intended that the section would be written in the current format, and then new formats would eventually be introduced when the time is right.
Does that, can I ask a question? Sorry.
certainly.
Does that conflict also apply to the farming regs that we did?
Yeah, there's a lot of, yeah.
There are a lot of conflicts in the
Okay.
farming regs.
No, I mean, that one conflict in particular, that's all.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
So-
few in there.
James, I had planned to ask for a motion that we delete section 5.4, the one use per lot. And I'm wondering if you can live with Janelle's response.
Did I even answer the question?
Pardon?
And did I even answer the question?
Yeah, I think you did. You answered the question I asked.
Okay.
So what, and then the other thing I want to tell you, James, about the idea of withdrawing the application, we may at this meeting decide that we want to modify the amendment as written. And I think we're allowed to do that. So that the amendment that we pass will have some modifications. If we decide to do that rather than postpone the decision.
If I may, I think I can see where we might want to do something like that if the modifications are indeed minor. But at this juncture, I also feel like we don't, the town is currently probably operating with quite a large percentage being out of compliance with this. It's not like we have a bunch of applications on the table that there's a reason to rush this particular amendment to go through on tonight's meeting, or to get something on the table so that we can proceed as a town. So,
I-
personally, I think it deserves a little more attention to address some of these concerns that were brought up. And whether then at that point it becomes a minor change and we say, okay, that's the way we want to roll with it. I'm not sure that is my feeling at this point.
That's fine. I thank you for what you had to say, and I would like Phil to make his comments now.
Sure. I mean, I could echo a lot of what James already said. I think we're in agreement on a lot of things, especially that I think this is a good thing. And I think that it helps a lot of the people that are doing it out of compliance now, and creates a better path forward for some oversight into some of the businesses that may be operating out of compliance, by giving them a relatively straightforward path to be compliant. I think the things that when I went through and read through, I won't say all the correspondence, but I'll say 90% of it, I spent quite a while looking through it all. There was a lot. I think that there were a couple things that I wanted to discuss as a commission, one of which was in the major home business and maybe the minor, the discussion around employees and what an employee was versus an owner is, I think, a point that we should discuss and figure out and make sure that the wording that we use is what we intend. I think I'm pretty clear on what the commission intends, but not 100% sure that, because we all think it says the same thing, is that what it says when somebody else reads it. I think.
Would you then propose that we substitute the phrase employee/contractor or the word?
I don't know yet. I'm not exactly 100% sure how. I think it's just a
All right.
point that I think we should discuss as a group.
Okay, all right.
And the other thing that I thought would be something to discuss was the part in here that says we can have multiple businesses per site, as long as admit they're aggregated. And I can't remember, was that,
There
is
can
that
be
the minor also?
there can be multiple home businesses on the site, and their impacts will be aggregated to consider whether they're minor or they're major.
Right. I guess that only applies to,
What if someone's working from home, for example, but they also choose to, or their spouse, for instance, has a doctor's office and they have appointments. So it's the combination of one person who may be working from home in their home office, and then another person within the residence
Right.
that has different use that might bring off-site visitors. So it's looked at cumulatively.
yep. And I apologize because I wrote these notes when we thought we were going to have the meeting, so they're not as clear in my head as they were when I wrote them. I just know that I wrote down a couple things, is like major and employees, and like, should we put a number there? Define employee versus owners, multiple business limit, if we want to put a limit on it. And then the only last thing was, and I don't know why this was there, but size of external for minor. So I think but that doesn't include exterior. Yeah, I don't know. So I think there's a few things that we should discuss. I'm hoping that they fall within the minor changes. But I'm open to however the commission feels we should continue to discuss, and whether we amend
So
it
we'll
or redo it.
After we've heard everybody's initial
Yep.
comment, we then can move on to other discussion.
Yep.
So Steve, I'm welcoming Steve. He's here. I know he had things to say. Would you like to make some comments, Steve?
Sure. I'm in favor of the new regulation. It's certainly not perfect, but it's better than what we had. And if we wait to get a perfect regulation, I really don't think that that's ever going to happen. We live in an imperfect world, so to expect perfection is not logical. There are some minor concerns, but very minor. I do believe that this regulation will capture any outlandish home business that might arise in Cornwall. I think that the regulation is written well enough that it would identify those and it would stop that. And so I'm in favor of the regulation, and I think it holds water. And yes, like I said, it's not perfect, but it's certainly better than what we had, and I'm in favor of it.
Thank you, Steve. I especially appreciate your efforts to attend tonight. Keith, what do you have to say?
All right. Well, I'm in agreement. I think we've got a good regulation. I think it's a drastic improvement over where we were at with the previous regulation. I think it's really good for the town of Cornwall. I think, I have a few questions that, the whole employee thing, maybe we could reword that to include, contractors, but I think we've got the right safeguards in there to protect us and protect the community from any outlandish things, as Phil and Steve have said. I think we're on the right track. I think it's a good regulation, and I think it's good for the town. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Keith. Lastly, Christine. You seem to be muted somehow.
The microphone's not working, Christine. Oh, now
you're
you're
muted.
muted.
You need to unmute yourself. She can't hear. You can't unmute her, John, can you?
I can't hear John either.
Hold on, I got it.
No,
Yeah,
he's
sure.
got it.
But it was telling me I couldn't unmute myself. So I do believe that we are on the right track for these regs. I think they do need rewriting. I support clearer categories for home businesses. And I appreciate, as someone who frequently applies for zoning permits for my own clients, I appreciate the clarity of what needs a permit, what doesn't, what the application process is. I do think that there are some changes that could be made. Very much agree with the employee subcontractor question. At one point in our meetings, I had asked my own personal concern. I had asked, what happens if there's a problem? How much leeway does the zoning enforcement officer have? And I think this was one of our own commission meetings. My fears and my concerns were put to rest by Karen, who explained, and I'm not even sure what the wording was anymore, but she basically explained how much authority she has in enforcing permits and complaints. And so my fears were put to ease. I'm not sure the public's have been. And I wonder if there's a way to maybe not even include it in the regulation. I realize it's redundant, but I wouldn't mind giving the zoning enforcement officer the authority to enforce the, just written, say that the zoning enforcement officer has the right to enforce these requirements. I don't know. Just
Well, we already have a big section in the regulations on enforcement that is still there, that states all of this and talks about the ZEO's tools, which include fines and cease and desist orders and cancellation of a permit.
Yes.
So that, I think I'm going to echo what Janelle has had to say, which is that these regulations will be seated within the book. And there are lots of other chapters, such as the chapter that describes what has to be on a site plan and how enforcement action is taken, that will still apply.
Right.
So I think the problem is that the public doesn't understand.
Correct.
And we cannot be writing these regulations so that every single citizen in Cornwall understands them perfectly, because we would then have to rewrite all of our regulations into much more simplistic language.
No, but I do think the goal should be to make things clear. And if it means repeating things, then I don't know if that's a problem, I guess.
I don't either. And I'm not here to argue with you. Sorry. We're going to move on. If you finished your comments, I would like to hear Bruce.
Yep, go ahead.
Thanks, Christine. So my tendency is to think of this more the way James did, that, one of the things that I was very impressed with was the volume of positive mail that we got, not positive because they love the proposal, but positive in the sense that lots of people gave lots of ideas, small additions, some changes, some verbiage changes, etc. I went through all these letters and came up with a total of 17 items that I thought certainly deserve some discussion and possibly some serious consideration about adding to the regulation that we're creating. So it would seem to me that it might benefit us in the relationship we have with the townspeople to be able to go over these items that they've proposed and to put a decision to push this forward at this point off until we can actually look at all of these. Some of them are, I think, really important. Some of them are issues that Janelle just spoke to, which is a conflict with our existing zoning regulations. I mean, I don't know whether we can actually do a zoning regulation that is in conflict with an existing zoning regulation and put that in force. That would be a question to Janelle. But my suggestion would be that we table this. And I know that you've all been working on this longer than I have, so I have empathy for that. But I think that it would be good to be able to table this and to be able to address as many items as we felt were worthy of being discussed. So that's my opinion.
All right, so we've heard from everyone. Will didn't plan on saying anything this evening. We can continue this discussion. It's only 7:45. We could start working on the individual changes that people are recommending, if you choose. Or
Yeah.
we can postpone that for another meeting, but I don't see why we shouldn't use the time we've set aside tonight to get to work.
Actually,
I'd like to say.
it's nice to have a refreshment of having everyone speak now. And then I think to give us another chance, because obviously a lot of people spoke after I did, and in terms of having a little more back and forth among the commission members so we can make a little headway on the direction we really want to go and what makes sense, if
Sure.
you agree. One thing that I immediately agree with, and I'm sorry I had it in my notes, and just like Phil, I had prepared for the last meeting, and of course my notes aren't as legible tonight, but about the employees, I had thought about that too a while back, and I thought that that would be an obvious thing to put employees, including subcontractors, and also maybe mentioning family members that live off-site as another catch for carry all for people to make sure that that's actually what we're implying in terms of our definition of an employee. But
But I think right now it says resident, doesn't it? So non-resident employee. So the non-resident would catch the outside family member.
I guess if you think that that's,
Well, I don't know that, yeah, I mean, is this where we'd like to start talking about, is the employee section?
Why not? I don't want us to take a vote on let's just let the discussion flow, and we don't
Okay.
need to take a vote on what we're going to discuss.
No, I just wanted to make sure that's where you wanted to go.
Fine.
'Cause I'm
This
glad
is
to do
not-
that.
This is low hanging fruit.
Yep. Top of page 2, right? Or is it?
we just had, who's driving the ship? Is that Janelle?
I think John is.
Oh,
Not I.
If you look on page 1 under the definitions, go back to page 1.
yeah,
Can
upper right corner.
may I say something before we get too in the weeds?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay, I just want us to think about comprehensively just where this fits within all of the regulations. So within here, keeping in mind that there's room for additional updates. So I think thinking things through, like, oh, this term employee, we might need to define it. And that would be a really good thing for us to have within the definition section of the regulation. So the trickiest thing for myself when I was approached with working on these regulations, it's like a sweater. Once you start to pull one thread, everything else kind of falls apart, and you see conflicts where you didn't see conflicts, and things need to be explained where other things weren't explained. So in my attempt to start doing all of the sections or a lot of the sections so it comprehensively made sense, we pulled this one piece out. And now that it's being done in a piecemeal fashion, to fit it into the rest of the regulations in a seamless way is certainly tricky. And as we move forward, thinking through where we'll call out other sections to make reference and reinforce topics and concepts is going to be a part of our thinking. So I think to get in the weeds is really, really good. The words matter. The interpretation of the words certainly matter. And also the broader context also matters. Doing it in a comprehensive way, it's a tricky thing because we've picked one section to redo and really focus on. So I think as we think these through, really deciding what the best approach may be in moving forward.
So, thank you, Janelle. That was
No
great.
problem.
And I think that is a great idea, in that maybe what we want to think about is adding the definition of employee to the definitions of this section.
Mhm.
And then when we do the reformatting of the whole thing, we decide if a definition is going to be applicable in more than one spot, it goes in the definition spot.
I
If
like
it
that
only
approach.
applies to that one piece of regulations, maybe it lives within that piece so that you can find it relative without having to flip back and forth.
I follow your thinking.
Okay.
I guess would we have a duplicate then if we do decide it goes in the definition section? Are we going to have it duplicated, or can we? Because
No, I
can't
think we would remove it
later.
from here and just say, see definition of employee, see the end section.
Would that be minor enough to not warrant public hearing and everything again, just to move a definition, or?
Well, I think that this change in wording, which could be accomplished by adding a definition, it could also be accomplished by writing employee/contractor. I can't think of
I'm not so
any
much-
other.
I'm not so much speaking about this now. I mean, later on when we go to update the definitions and stuff, would that be a major thing to do? To then
No.
remove it from this section?
No.
I don't think so.
I don't really care how we capture it. I just think it's important. And it also shows you know, a lot of this is our relationship with the community, and that's really what it's coming down to, I think, because all of us as a commission, obviously, we discussed this quite a bit and presented it to the community, and we've got some feedback from the community, and I think it's kind of our job to put some of those concerns to rest before we force this change onto the town. So as long as we capture and let also the community at large know that we heard them and we are making efforts to accommodate what their concerns are or explain our position. So, because I think a lot of it was misinformation, but I think that's important, just to keep that positive relationship going. So as wherever we capture the definition of employee, I don't think is as critical as long as we know that it's addressed and captured somewhere.
Is
So-
there anything, any other words that you want added to that definition then besides contractor?
I think there is. I think it's any non-regular worker, right?
Right. I mean, does it,
Whether it's a subcontractor or a contractor or an employee or, I don't know, temporary labor.
a volunteer?
Potentially.
Yeah,
I mean, they all
was
sort
almost
of.
thinking a
I mean, even
volunteer
if-
could, fall in that too.
Yeah, this
Well,
isn't this isn't about their status, whether they make money or not. It's a matter of, it's another body showing up to the house on a
Right.
or unregular basis. So however we capture that, it's not whether they're getting paid, but they're still driving, parking somewhere, the public sees them, whatever that is.
I don't think we want to open it up to like, I have a day here and a day there where I need a second person to come help me out.
Right.
Right. But if it's a regular person that comes to help with the business on a regular basis, then there needs to be only one or two or more, depending on the definitions, right?
I agree with you, Phil, but I just worry about how do we define regular,
We've defined it as non-resident.
No,
No, but
I mean
no,
regular, I mean the employee, the non-resident
no, I mean-
employee.
Right. No, I mean how often they show up. Like, I agree with you that we don't want to stop somebody showing up once in a while, once in a blue moon to help out with something. But how do we
Don't
define that they're
forget,
not
guys,
regularly showing?
I mean, it's the zoning enforcement officer who's going to be enforcing these regulations and interpreting what it was we're trying to say. We do
D-
want to find language that our next zoning enforcement officer 10, 20 years from now can also understand.
I think that if we just put, add subcontractor to that definition, I think we would probably be okay.
Volunteer too?
What about just
And-
simply saying no more than one non-resident individual associated with the home business?
Great.
And then you capture volunteers, you capture your subcontractor, you capture your subconsultant, you capture any odd thing
Right.
associated with the
And
home
you don't
business.
have to, and you
I
don't
think
have
the-
to define.
The crux of the discussion is this individual is associated with the home business and is not coming to the residents for residential uses or purposes.
Right.
What happens if it's a couple? Joking.
You.
And their dog.
So no more
So-
than one non-resident person associated
No.
with the business?
Yeah.
I would say individual.
Individual, sorry.
No, it's okay.
No more than one non-resident
Non-resident individual,
associated with the business,
the home business, for clarity.
the home business. Yep.
Any other comments about that before we move on?
And that should be in both, right? Major and minor.
Yeah, it would
Hey.
carry over.
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Now, is that wording opening it up to where it restricts the clients showing up? I'm just trying to think through this. Do
No,
we need to say doing work for the business or something like that instead of just as, I don't know.
no,
Um,
I don't think customers are associated with the business. I can think of a lot of businesses that don't want their clients necessarily associated with them.
I do see what Keith's saying.
Word associated,
Mhm.
working for the
Yeah, I'm just
business.
wondering if there's some better word, working for the business or something like that, or,
But then you can mince words around what's working.
Performing,
work.
performing
Right.
tasks,
Performing work.
performing
Yeah, performing
tasks
tasks.
for the business.
Yeah, maybe something like that, because then that would include volunteers that way.
Yeah, just say performing tasks for the business.
That is clumsy.
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
something.
then it's just as much ambiguity as it was before.
I still like non-resident employee / subcontractor and leave it at that. And if you got volunteers,
Good for you.
let Aaron come down on them. Or maybe including volunteers, labor. Including paid and unpaid labor.
I think that would work.
Okay,
Mhm.
Say it
I'm good
again.
with that.
Say it again.
Including paid and unpaid laborers.
No more than one non-resident paid and unpaid laborer.
Employee
Employee.
/ contractor.
In-
No, I think, James, I think what you were saying is no more than one non-resident employee / subcontractor, paid or unpaid.
Sure.
All contractors and employees are paid. If they aren't paid, they're volunteers. So
Right.
why don't we just go with
Non-resident
employee
employees,
/
contractors or volunteers.
yeah, just leave it at those 3 words. Can we
Okay.
all live with that? Everybody live with that? Bruce, I'm staring at you.
Yep.
So employee, subcontractor, or volunteer.
Yeah, can we all
works
live
for
with
me.
that?
Yes.
Thanks, Anna.
Phil, I think it's contractor, not sub, but that's
Oh.
just what I've heard,
Okay,
just for clarity.
sure.
And I was looking at Janelle.
Bruce, I'm sorry that I didn't answer your question earlier. I completely had my internet connection problems.
That's
I
no
did
problem.
my best.
I have lots of questions to ask you. I'll get you later.
Anytime.
Okay.
What else could we discuss?
Anna, there's also been some questions about, what does retail sales mean?
Good God,
Not much more clear.
isn't that obvious?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think there was some concern about wholesale warehouses selling over the internet, selling retail items and then shipping them out.
That's
Well,
retail.
Aren't the retail,
retail.
I mean, aren't we gonna be discussing the retail sales with the special permit anyway?
Yeah,
Because you
Yes.
can't have retail sales unless you have the special permit.
exactly.
Correct.
But I guess what Bruce is saying is, can you have wholesale sales?
Right.
Well, wholesale sales and retail sales are 2 different things. It's in Economics 101.
Yeah.
So no, you can't.
So do we say no wholesale or retail sales?
Yeah, for
I
minor.
don't think we need to.
Okay,
So let's not go looking for a problem that doesn't exist.
okay.
James, you mentioned the brand new building.
Yes.
Elaborate on that.
So we were talking about how we would have a limitation of space for the size that a home business could occupy in a residence. But if there was another building and we were envisioning, say, a large barn on the property, that they could utilize the entire barn on the property, because why not? Maybe they're, what they do takes up a lot of volume. And the barn is already there. But then if someone is considering building a large shop space for a business that doesn't, the shop doesn't already exist, or the large building doesn't exist, do we want to somehow put that in a category because it's a new structure? We don't have a size limit on it, and it is associated with this home business. Do we want to automatically kick that into the major home business category so it goes through a special permit process?
Karen,
I don't
can
know.
I want to ask Karen what happens now if someone wants to build an accessory structure on their property. Are there any size limits?
Not necessarily.
So if someone wants to build a barn,
Or something like that, but the zoning permit usually clarifies what it's used for. The question comes up, is this a garage for residential use? Is there any businesses associated with it? And that's usually clearly on the zoning permit, and it's usually addressed even by Torrington Area Health in terms of the uses inside a garage. A garage is a garage. You don't live in it and you don't work in it. That's me.
now,
I also want to caution the commission, if you're putting conditions on a building just because it's new versus an existing building, that's inconsistent. So I would just be very careful about consistencies within the regulation, that you're treating buildings, structures the same, regardless of how long they've been there.
correct.
James, I thought about this some. And in my mind, I found it hard to imagine a business that was using a really large building that was going to cause a problem that only had one non-resident employee.
I hear you. That was actually my argument during the public hearing. I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I just like, I mean, yeah, it'd be great to have a huge barn to put stuff in and do stuff in, but I don't have the space for that right now.
So
well, I mean, also our regulations, we don't have size restrictions on anything. We don't, somebody could build a huge house, they could build a castle, they could have 100 cars.
Well,
and store them
but
somewhere. And as
You're forgetting,
all as a residential application. I mean, we have the largest post and beam structure that was built this century, I think, in Cornwall. It's up off Milton Road there, Clark Road. So you could have, currently it's not restricted to a business, a home business, that all of a sudden you have a large building. You could have a large building under a residential application currently.
Studio, artist studios, there's several that I know that are substantially large. There's
Yep.
studios.
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to address that point and discuss it in front of the commission. And I mean, we have a large portion of the public here to say that we did think about it. And I like Janelle's comment that basically if we are allowing it in one situation, an existing
Consistency.
building, then that's probably a rule for concern if we have two different rules, one for an existing building and another for a new building.
there are some limits in our regs. There's a coverage limit for
Right.
a lot.
Yeah.
And don't accessory structures have to be, do they have to be built within the buildable area on a lot, Karen?
yeah,
Yeah,
Well,
so,
and Cornwall's got some hills, which make it harder to build too.
and
Right.
a few wetlands too.
Yeah,
so
and there's setbacks.
do you remain concerned about that, James?
Well, I did want to discuss it and see what the commission thought. As Phil mentioned, I was having a hard time envisioning when it can become a problem. If you have a new large structure that's going to be part of a business. But I just didn't know if then we wanted to automatically say that's kicked into a special permit process or not. So I'm just kind of welcoming the other commissioners' thoughts on it.
Thanks. You had one other point that was about decibels. Would you like to
Yeah.
define the limits on decibels for every potential home business, for every potential hour of operation?
And obviously, I mean, it's probably been my usual stance is I don't like to firmly define things because it gives the commission less control. But that is one that I know a lot of people were concerned about it. So I don't think it's necessarily harmful to have decibel measurements in the regs, but if you think it is, I'd be curious to hear the arguments about it. It was interesting to hear your points about why Torrington abandoned theirs. I did do a little research, and yeah, the state's got their regs. I think, as Jamie Longley pointed out, I forget what those were. I think 50 and 55 maybe. But it's that's, you usually measure it at the property boundary is where that decibel meter is taken. And that's actually not that loud. Living fairly close to Route 4, I regularly see stuff in the 60s when a car goes by that's a little on the loud side. But you don't want that noise all the time. So I appreciate your clarification of, do we really want to put a hard and fast number on here, because it can be actually backfire on us where it's might be at 44 decibels, but it's 24/7, and that's not so fun.
And don't forget that under the regulation as written, even with a site plan for a minor home business, we can ask the applicant to take a decibel reading. We can, and for the major home business, we can do the same. Janelle, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so just as written now, there is the sentence that reads, no excessive noise, vibration, smoke, dust, odors, heating, lighting, or glare shall be produced by the home business. And I remember in the brainstorming session, because James, just to your point of wanting to have flexibility as a commission and not having a hard, fast rule or like an arbitrary number that you're using, in this situation, should a neighbor feel that the noise or other variables associated with the home business are excessive, they could certainly come to the ZEO, come to the commission and argue why it's excessive, and then the commission can make their judgment call based upon that. So that gives, because for example, if a set decibel is reached and decided upon, which is a very tricky thing to judge and an even trickier thing to enforce, then you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
And if a neighbor keeps coming in and saying, I know it's not at this level of dBA, however, it's still excessive in my mind's eye, then you're given nothing to use as a tool. So the purpose of the language that was used was very intentional, so that anyone that had a complaint feeling within their own judgment call that it was excessive, be it noise, vibration, smoke, or other externalities produced by the home business, then they could come to the ZEO and the ZEO would address it accordingly. And that flexibility was really, really intentional.
Question.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Keith.
I don't think we want to lose that flexibility. I like that we have that flexibility. I worry, like you mentioned yourself, that if we hard define it, that we're going to limit ourselves, and then we're stuck. As Janelle said, if somebody comes to us a complaint and we, it doesn't quite meet that decibel level, we're stuck.
I have a question about, because if the state has their own definition for residential and business zones, et cetera, is that something that's then automatically applied throughout the state, or that's just a guideline that, in other words, it
No,
might be, a redundant, not redundant, but then it would work in our favor that there's a cap of the state, as well as we can go to our own regs and say, we also have this limitation of what we think is excessive to layer on top of that.
There's many regulations that the state have in place and that enforce and that we look to. And it's, as far as deep is concerned with the decibel ratings, I think that's a great threshold. That's always a tool. If Karen ever were baffled by a situation where there was a lot of noise and she wanted to call upon the state agency for guidance, it's helpful. But I think in every situation where there are state rules, as it's always going to be the more stringent rule that applies. So be it local or be it state, you're working within that framework. If that helps, does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, but so that's perfect then. So the state rule does apply if we didn't have anything, but if we also say excessive noise, then we can put that on top of that state rule. Is what you're
Yeah, I mean the state rule, that's our framework that we're stuck with.
Perfect. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Then I feel a little more comfortable with that.
Phil, you had a question about multiple businesses on site. Do you want to discuss that some more?
Yeah, I think that mostly applied to the major, right? Which I guess goes to special permit anyway, thinking more about it, because with only one contractor, worker, whatever it was that we just decided on, it would really end up being like, you can't have more than one minor home business in a residence, right? You can have a home office and a minor home business, but you can't have two minor home businesses.
It would trigger the major provisions.
Right.
Yeah.
So you really can't, I mean, if I'm reading it right, you really can't have you can't have two minor home businesses in the same place, because it would automatically trigger, well, unless you didn't have any employees, which then could potentially be a home office too, right?
Yeah, you could always have the home office. You could have the home office and a minor home business in the same place.
In the end, it all depends on the impact.
The cumulative impact.
Yeah.
The cumulative impact. So that's where the flexibility of interpretation comes in here.
Yep.
Because we can't anticipate every potential business, but we sure can evaluate their cumulative impact on the neighborhood. You know, that's the whole point, especially in the special permit section.
Yep. And I guess I'm less, as I think about it more and think about the fact that doesn't matter how many major home businesses are there. I do have one part on that, but major home businesses are there. They're still limited to the 2,000 square feet of exterior storage and everything else that goes with it as a cumulative effect, right?
Exactly.
I think the only part that I might want to think about is in the major home business, if it's two or more non-resident, whatever it is, employees, contractors, etc. If you have more than one major, if you have a couple of major home businesses, like what, is there a number that's too many employees? Or whatever.
If you have two major home businesses, but you own a property that's 100 acres, doesn't that set the stage there?
I don't know if they're still using the same driveway, if they're all using the same driveway.
Well, and also when we're in major home business, we're under special permit, so it's got to come before us, right? So
yeah, and you'll get a
we-
site plan and you'll know the lay of the land and you'll have all the details and you'll get a narrative and you'll have an understanding of the numbers of offsite employees and onsite employees.
Yeah.
And I guess that would go into, excessive
Yes.
use, whatever, of if you had like, if you had 50 people coming in the driveway every day, that might be too many.
Then it probably shouldn't be in a residential zone.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And then we can cover that when we're in special permit.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, I'm good. I think that's what I was thinking about when I made these notes a week ago.
Okay. Bruce, let's start on your 17 items. Have we covered any of them?
Oh, you've covered a lot of them.
Okay, good.
I've got noise. I know that was a big concern for everybody. And I think that we've kind of addressed that. It's a positive thing that by stating it the way we did, we actually have a lot more ability to be able to control it than if we slip the state noise control in there. I do know that there's 3 or 4 towns that do have adopted their own noise controls, but it has to be approved by the state. And you're right, it's very restrictive on their part. Janelle?
Bruce, just to that point, it should certainly be an ordinance and not within the zoning regulations.
There you go.
Because if it's slipped within the zoning regulations, there's that non-conformity and so based upon the effective date, so there'll be all of the noises that were occurring before the effective date versus this new rule. So it should really be an ordinance because ordinance get applied to all properties regardless of the timing of their effective date.
Yep.
So that's really tricky to insert into a zoning regulation, provided every noise that operated prior to this effective regulation would be existing legal non-conforming.
Right.
So that's a tricky one. That's like very similar to rooster ordinances that you see around the state. So who can argue that their rooster was here before the zoning regulation was in effect and who can't? So that's why oftentimes towns will adopt that as an ordinance. So you go away from that effective date.
Got it. So that would be a different approach.
Yeah. It typically Board of Selectmen would be in charge of that one.
Right. The other question that's come up is, a minor home business is growing and becoming a major home business. So do we have any controls over businesses growing in these certain areas? And do we have an ability to be able to reevaluate and decide that they're no longer a minor business and that we now need to bring them back to apply for a major business? Do we have any controls for that?
Yeah, so aside from Karen's ZEO enforcement capabilities, should anything come to her attention, there's also, it's, I believe on page 2E, it's all modifications to the home business must be brought to the attention of the ZEO. The zoning agent may bring proposed changes before the commission to review for compliance.
Okay. Back to that statement about what a retail sale is. One of the comments were that services are also considered a retail sale. So is there restrictions on services, or is that something that needs to be clarified in our regulations?
So the only instance, to my understanding, where retail sales would be allowed under this potential amendment is with a major home business. And then when you get to the provisions of major home business, so 0.5 specific requirements for major home businesses, you do get into part C that states if a major home-based business includes retail, the majority of the goods shall be produced on the premises. My understanding with that, so that's a good. We're talking about retail of goods.
Retail.
As far as services go, one can look at that and interpret whether that's going to fall under a major home business or a minor home business based upon the visitors off-site from like the general public to get these services.
Mhm.
So tangible good versus service. Are they walking away with a product versus, maybe they got a nice massage and they're relaxed.
Right. Okay. I'm ready for one of those. Okay. The other issue was, let me read my notes here. Oh, I guess, the way we have the regulation written concerning what kind of materials can be stored or what kind of materials can be maintained in buildings. When we're there, the comment was about hazardous materials, explosives, ammunition, fireworks, or other dangerous materials. Is there any control that we have over that being allowed in a residential area?
Yeah, so that that brings you into the greater context of the regulations. So within the regulations, I do believe within permitted uses, that section 3 of the current regulations, you do get into all of the not authorized situations. And I do know hazardous materials are called out in the pre-existing zoning regulations. I think it's also, so let me see really quick. So I believe that's on page 7 in our regulations as they stand about hazard materials, etc., radioactive waste. And then also within this current section, we get into, oh, where is it?
It's stated there somewhere.
Yeah, so it's as far as approval criteria goes, we get into it when we talk about, you know, our safety, that always comes into play. And then also any other use that would create non-compliance, that includes local, state, and federal laws. So a lot of those substances and concerns that you mentioned were also covered by, there's a lot of covered laws around hazardous material. I think you said ammunition, other examples.
Earlier you had mentioned that there is a description of what all these things mean. So for instance, that's a separate part of the zoning regulation. Is that why we're not being more specific or lengthy about describing the various things that are involved in this, like employees, like subcontractors?
There's
Like-
a section called definitions.
Okay, and
the
that will carry all of this, and we can look at that and maybe add things to it when we review.
We have a lot of things to add to it.
Yeah.
Janelle has in mind quite a few definitions
Yeah, it's
to
yeah.
get specific about.
But I think right now, Bruce, another section to look at within the regulations is Article 3, and that gets into permitted uses, and it gets into the uses not permitted in any zone, and also what's permitted in residential zones. And not to mention, there's a greater provision about hazardous materials that I do need to find. I think it's in one of the preliminary sections, like section 1
Yes.
or something along those lines.
It's
Yes.
not permitted in any zone. There's a section called that.
Yeah, I know hazardous materials gets discussed multiple times.
Okay, that's all 16.
You're kidding.
No way.
Over 17.
Well, so many of them were already discussed, or several of them were already discussed. So
Yeah.
that was what I
If
had.
So Christine, do you have anything you wanted to add here? Your one concern was the employee contractor thing.
Yes. As- yeah.
So if I could just check out whether I'm hearing you all properly. There were many concerns which we have now discussed, and some of them we have set aside. The ones that remain include changing the word employee to employee/contractor/volunteer wherever it occurs in the regulation. And I don't think I've heard of any other changes that we all felt were necessary.
Do we have the, we didn't talk about the underlying single use versus
Right.
one use per lot?
Right.
Mm.
Well, here's the problem. There is a bigger problem with that, if I can find my notes,
Yeah, I know.
because it's a recurring statement in multiple locations. But the lawyer specifically mentioned that section and a few others. Well, I got too much paper.
Janelle, do you know how other communities might address that? Obviously, this isn't unique to Cornwall, and we've got multiple uses like farming happening in the community and things like that. Do you?
Where there's inconsistencies?
Yeah, or is the one use per lot, is that a common regulation, or is that more unique to Cornwall? No?
That's a regulation that I haven't seen in a while, provided that mixed use is certainly an adaptive reuse, and mixed use is becoming something. So as a blanket, like no, only one use per lot, I really haven't seen that. Yeah, to be honest, it threw me for a loop.
How about you, Karen?
Sorry.
It's just a very interesting interpretation as to what a use is. So you live in a house, you have your car in a garage, you use other parts of your property for farming. Are some of those could be all compatible to the overall use of residential? It's a really interesting concept because you go down the rabbit hole with that one.
Well,
Now,
home office
my
is the
question,
same way, right?
are these not still home uses? It's a home business, right? It's not a business. This is not it's not a general business zone. It's still, the use is, it's a home. And you just have it's a subsidiary use, basically. It's an accessory use.
Yeah, that's where it's
probably the answer.
That's where it's confusing and inconsistent, because if one reads that provision very, very, very literally, only one use per lot, then there go all of these accessory uses that we see in many spots.
Yeah.
Right.
Probably including accessory dwelling.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be that big an issue to have, move to delete 5.4. Regardless of whether we have a motion on this current amendment tonight. That's just my feeling about it. It's housekeeping work. It would be easy to do. It's the whole section. That's the only sentence.
Well, it's an interesting thing
Paragraph.
about how you would define a use, because if you can look at it in a broader scale, maybe it still allows us a sense of control there that we might want to maintain. I mean, can you recreate on your home use? I mean, you can open it, like, why not? Why not be able to work from home and still have that be part of your
Home.
Yeah, part of your home. So I still kind of like the idea that that's in the broader sense of what a residence implies. And it's not just a bedroom community that you can only sleep in your home, but you can actually live here.
So you're in favor of getting rid of that section?
No, I think maybe we should just look at a larger definition in terms of what
the use is. Okay.
But,
Makes sense.
and at least think of that currently, and then if it becomes an issue, or maybe we think of that on a side note, but.
I'll simply say, when I first came to Cornwall, I think the biggest conflict I had was artist studios. And what is an artist? And if they are using their property to paint or whatever in their basement, and then their artwork goes out back to New York or something like that. But there's a lot of issues that have been brought up about artist studios, and that is really the backbone of Cornwall. And that if you go out in the field, artist studios, secondary buildings, for somebody that uses, is big artwork as opposed to small artwork. And that has been a real question as to when does that morph into a business? Is it a business? And that was one of my first questions raised about how to look at what artists are and if that constituted a business.
Well, and under this, it would end up being a minor, right? Potentially.
Unless they sold on site.
Yeah.
Right. And it would be me.
perhaps.
Or if one person came to pick up their artwork, but if it's a huge piece of artwork and it requires a crane to take it practically out of a building. I mean,
Well,
that was.
Listen, we could sit here all night fantasizing about potential applications. I'm inclined, first of all, I want to thank everybody. This was a really great discussion, don't you all think? And Janelle helped us a lot. I'm sorry that we didn't have her present earlier. She might have been at some of our other public hearings, but I personally was trying to shield her from the nasty comments. We could have gotten through this a lot sooner without.
But the public hearings wasn't for us to discuss then, right? I mean, we were listening. So
No,
this is
that's
really our
true.
first opportunity to discuss. since-
You're right. You're right. You're absolutely right.
So
Sorry.
I think that, I mean, I think it's fine if Janelle wasn't there and now we've brought what we received from the public hearing back, and Janelle has, as usual, provided us with some insight into state regulations and what other places are doing and helped us understand where in some of our other parts of our regulations that things are covered or not.
I think it was great to have Janelle there to kind of answer, questions that I was looking at and going, gee, did we cover that? And it was
I
really
sure
fun to have her go
appreciate it.
through it and, point out where that was covered. So I think hopefully that's answered a lot of people's questions.
I think so.
I watch all the videos, so it's like I'm there. But
There.
I think it's a better use of the commission's time and my time for us to take our notes and then convene. But
Yep.
always, I'm willing, at any given moment, should my participation be asked for, certainly if the commission asks, I will make myself available.
Steve still with us?
Yeah, I see his light.
Okay.
I
Is there anybody on the commission who now feels that we should have another meeting to discuss the regulation, to make changes?
No.
Anybody? Okay. So I'm going to propose a motion. The wording I'll transmit to you directly, Karen, so you don't have to write every word down. And
Thank you, Anna.
the person who makes the motion can just say, I so move, instead of struggling to repeat. Based on the fact that, quote, increasing opportunities for businesses to establish themselves here, unquote, ranked second as a top 10 priority during a survey conducted as part of the Plan of Conservation and Development planning process. And the 2020 Plan of Conservation and Development set a specific goal of making it, quote, easier for residents to work from home and allow low impact businesses in residential zones, unquote. I move the adoption of the amended home business regulation, Article 8, Section 16, the deletion of sections 8.16 to 8.21 of the current zoning regulations, and their replacement with 8.16 home businesses with the following modifications. Wherever the word employee occurs, it shall be replaced by employee / contractor / volunteer. Got that? Does anybody care to make the motion?
So moved.
I'll
Does
second.
Okay, it was seconded by Keith. All in favor, say aye or raise your hands.
Aye.
All right.
So Bruce, you can't vote because
Oh, right.
Steve is here.
But
But
what
I,
is
What is
Steve's
he
vote?
here?
Well,
I
Steve's
don't
not,
see his vote.
no, we can't see Steve's vote. So Bruce should vote.
I think Bruce should.
okay, all right, fine. So, wow, It passed unanimously. Thank you all. What a fabulous team. I just love all the perspectives, and I appreciate tremendously the care that's been expressed about listening to the Cornwall public and wanting to be sure that we're responsive. I am often impatient and I want to move things along, but I really think that our process has been ideal. And hope to continue working on other issues in the future. Thanks to everybody tonight. And the meeting has come to an end.
We have a meeting next week, right?
Yes, we do.
All too soon.
Sorry, it's our regularly scheduled.
I move to adjourn.
Actually, I wanted to thank Janelle
Sorry.
personally too. Thanks, Janelle, for your efforts and work. And it's nice to have you guys back up here because that was really important for the commission.
Anytime.
Yeah, agree.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it was also nice to have a lot of back and forth tonight. I know it alleviated, I think, the commission members to go through all these. I mean, we had a lot of feedback from the community and not all of it positive, but I really think that this platform was important to have so that we can go through and see, hopefully, that we are thinking along the same lines, and hopefully this reg is going to work. So
Totally agree. I love having these conversations with you guys because I think we really work things out.
Even Bruce's 17 things. They weren't as bad as they sounded at first.
Well, Janelle was able to answer every one of them, so it was perfect.
There you go. Yeah, good job, everyone.
Okay, good night, good night.
Do we have to
Nope,
adjourn?
we need a vote.
Move to
We
adjourn?
have to have a vote. All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Good night.
Aye.